Welcome everybody to Viva Connections SharePoint Framework bi-weekly. It is August 25th, 2022. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a product manager in the Microsoft 365 platform areas. In this call, we kind of talk about the latest, what's happening related on our open source projects, what's the latest samples, what's happening in the SharePoint Framework. So we kind of actually tease a bit about the upcoming 1.16 release. So we're going to mention a few things, what's happening there as well, and some of the timelines. And then as mentioned already, we're going to go through the open source project updates on PnPjs, CLI, Reusable PnP Controls, have the community samples covered, so what's happening on that side. It has been a bit slower in August, but that is as expected because it's summer season, and now we're starting to see more and more people coming back to business. We'll start the demos and the real stars of the day with Tony Phillips, who's going to talk about using Microsoft Graph education endpoints in a SharePoint framework to create My Assignments web part. So really, really cool solution what Tony has built. And then as the following demo is then Waldek, who's going to show on getting started on building custom list form experiences with SharePoint framework. We did actually have Paolo doing similar kind of demo in the past, but there's always a new learnings and new experiences on how to get started. And this time the form will have the minimal functionality as well. So there is a really nice demo available to get started on building those forms, which actually Walter created. So it's good that he is then presenting what's available. Now, let's start going through the slides. Not going to read off the whole slide, but just to remind everybody, we do have multiple opportunities for you to get involved within our Microsoft 365 platform community. Not just about SharePoint Framework, not just about JavaScript development. There's multiple projects, multiple ways of contributing. We do welcome you to be part of our community projects, or if you would be looking into building samples, those are more than welcome. Now, a bit of a note related on samples. We do actually request the samples to get submitted to our specific repos so that we know that the sample exists also within the 6 months. So that's actually the reason why we don't link to your sample necessarily in your GitHub. Rather, would love to have them in a centralized location or as a copy of your sample so that we know that even though you would delete the repo, the sample would still exist in the centralized location. That's kind of the thinking behind of that. But most important thing for Microsoft is always your feedback. So we really want to understand how these goals are working, how the features are working, how the products are working. If something isn't working, please let us know. Don't talk about well, you can certainly badmouth Microsoft if you want. That's completely fair if there are issues which are working, but please do tell us also if something isn't working so we can actually address those and fix those. So that's a fair game. Also, if you're looking into doing a demos in this community calls, you can sign up for a demo spot using the AKMS M365 PnP/request/demo, and then we'll ping you and get you scheduled. We do have some open spots within upcoming calls as well, which is a great opportunity to gain visibility and sharing or get experiences around presenting in the community calls and potentially even get an MVP status at some point, because all of these presentations and demos and all of those does count if you want to be a Microsoft 365 MVP at some point. Now, on the other assets, we always have the slide available. Again, we do have two different YouTube channels, one where we have, in quotes, professional guidance videos, and then we have the community videos. They are professional and like good guidance as well, but they're also provided by non-Microsoft employees. A lot of open source assets, a lot of sample galleries and samples available. And then if you're thinking that, well, I can't remember all of this URL, luckily there's only one URL to remember, which is AKMS M365/community, from where you can find all of the different assets. We also execute a quite range of different community calls, and the primary one right now is the Microsoft 365 platform community call, which happens every single week on Tuesday. Now, this call has been on a summer break between July 1st and 31st of August. And because of that, the next Tuesday, which is after the 31st of August, is 6th of September. So not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, we are back with the Microsoft 365 platform call. On top of that, we have then other community calls, which we are looking into potentially consolidating on the Tuesday call to make it more clear what's covered and when and where. So it should make your life easier as a community member. And again, AKMS M365 calls is the location to get started and get access on all of those. Now, You might be looking and asking, how would I get started and how would I contribute? And luckily, we do have you covered on there as well. And I'll let David to talk about what's the Sharing is Caring initiative.
Awesome. Thank you, Vesa. Well, friends, as you are going to see, there are plenty of opportunities for you to contribute to the community, a number of samples, a number of programs. This program, Sharing is Caring, is here to provide you hands-on guidance on how to get involved in the variety of those areas. Perhaps you would like to present a demo on these calls, but you're a little nervous. Maybe you've not done it before, or you want to submit a sample to one of the many plethora of repositories that we have available to you, but you're not really comfortable with GitHub, you're not quite sure what a fork is or a pull request. As Vesa mentioned, we got you covered. These sessions are live, hands-on, safe space opportunities, meaning they're not recorded, so you're free to join, ask any and all questions without feeling like it was going to be captured in a moment in time and recorded for everyone. We work together, hand in hand, show you how to complete a variety of these tasks. And at the end of it, it even counts as a contribution. So we invite you to join any and all. We're scheduling as the summer ends, more coming up. We've got a number of things ramping back up. The maturity model practitioners, writing for the web, Power Platform Samples contributor is one that's very exciting because, by the way, that's going to be done live at the Power Platform Conference in Orlando in September. We have a live session. So if you would like to sit amongst your peers and learn how to accomplish this, we're going to have a dedicated session room for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. The first live Sharing is Caring event in person in history. So you want to be there. Tell your grandkids. All right. Now, once you have contributed, we want to recognize you. So if we go to that next slide, we're going to provide recognition in a formal and accredited way by partnering with Credly. Yep, that's that same Credly that provides you those badges when you get Microsoft certified. We do the same. They sit right alongside. They're all achievable by everyone, and there's a variety of tiers in which if you contribute more, we're going to recognize you by giving you additional badges. We've got more and more coming out. We've got some that have been released just in the last couple of weeks. Be on the lookout. You can share them on Twitter. You can put them on the fridge. You can put them on LinkedIn. Share them with mom. They love them. Everybody loves them. And if you're working in a consultancy, then you're going to absolutely love these because it shows your clients and your managers that you're making a difference in a formal and official way in the community. So we do need you to opt in. ak.ms/m365 PnP-recognition. You only need to do that once. We'll tie that to your GitHub account, and we'll make sure that you get credited and recognized. So thank you all for the amazing work you're doing. Vesa, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David, on that one. Really, really cool stuff for sure. Now, next we'll move into Vesa to talk about the SharePoint Framework. Well, thank you. So I'll continue here. Yep, you're welcome. Now, on the SharePoint Framework side, we are seeing a significant growth again after the small holiday break. So quite typically, we can see from the historically in worldwide usage of SharePoint Framework, there's always drops between the holiday season like summer and then the winter holiday season. And right now, the all-time highest usage in a day level is Monday from this week, but which is really cool. So we are seeing a significant growth worldwide on the SharePoint Framework usage across Viva Connections, Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint. And we do have tens of millions of monthly active users, which are using custom partner or customer-created SharePoint Framework components. Now, on the future of the SharePoint, quick teasers on what's actually happening there. So 1.15.2 was released 2 weeks ago, roughly. Is that right? That's probably right. And we had some additional capabilities and options available for across the whole stack. 1.16 is planned to go preview in upcoming weeks. And so it might happen within a matter of days, or it might be a bit longer. I cannot promise you an exact date because that might actually change, but it's happening relatively soon. And in here, we are upgrading to the Teams JavaScript SDK to V2 to be the native supported in SPFx solution. This will actually be rolling out in a way that it's impacting all of the existing solutions as well. So as long as you are hitting public APIs in the Teams JavaScript SDK, you are not impacted, as the Teams JavaScript SDK V2 is backward compatible with V1 APIs. We're also looking into having asynchronous support for Viva Connection ACES rendering, and then a really cool new feature, which we're going to demo with Alex is going to demo that within a few weeks in the Tuesday call, which is a new top actions supported in web part. So you can actually add your own actions in the toolbar of the web part. So when you're putting a web part in edit mode or hovering on top of the web part, you can add an additional actions in that toolbar. So really, really cool feature, which is coming available for our custom third-party custom developers as well. 1.16 general availability is happening by end of this year, and 1.17 ETA in December, January, maybe. Well, let's see how that goes. All of this obviously can be adjusted based on what's actually happening, but there are going to be a lot of stuff available within the framework. Also, AC is actually calling out a few things. So first of all, looking into limiting to Node version support to 16, starting from 1.16 release. We're looking into Node 18 version. And also, there's a work being done related on the right React version to the bump that version to the right level. So I cannot give you an exact date, but there is work actively being done so that all of those versions are, again, in quotes, up to date. Now, let's move to the PnPjs client-side library side, and I will let Julie to talk about this one.
Thanks, Vesa. So we released version 3.6 on August 16th. We had some general documentation updates, as we always do, and that did include pinning in the Getting Started video series that Patrick Rogers and I just did for version 3. That's on the Getting Started page. We've added graph support for lists, content types, and columns. That was a big undertaking and has been in progress for a couple months. If you find issues with that, please do let us know in the issues list. We did some refactoring and simplified URL and query scaping for version 3. So that got reworked completely. There is also bug fixes for SharePoint sharing, graph support for special folders, a few little edits to the content types and the iViewInfo type definition. So all of that got added in that last release. Please do check out the nightly builds. If you have a PR that gets merged, or there's a PR that is merged with a feature that you want to check out, that always will show up in those nightly builds, and you can follow those instructions right there on the screen to take advantage of that. And as always, follow us on M365 PnPjs on Twitter to see the latest news from us. We also do post in the PnP channel in LinkedIn. So either place you can follow along with us. And that's all I have. Back to you, Vesa.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie, on that one. Really, really cool to see these new features as well. Then we move into updates on the CLI for Microsoft 365, and Gary is in the call to cover these.
I am. Thank you very much, Vesa. So hi, everyone. So we're back with more updates to CLI. So we've been busy adding new commands and enhancements to the latest beta version. So we've been adding new commands for Microsoft Bookings, which is interesting, our very first commands. We've also added the ability to grant admin consent as well when you're creating Azure Active Directory apps. So we know that this is a manual step that a lot of developers need to go through when you first create that applications, and now there's just a simple flag on there that any permissions that need admin consent, they'll automatically be applied, so it'll get you developing much quicker. Extras that we've got in there on SharePoint, so we've been doing a lot of work on permissions as well, some more enhancements to Microsoft Search, as well as updating our SPFx Doctor command to make sure that your environment is suitable and ready for the new version of SharePoint Framework. We've also got some news. So in the last week, we've also got 2 new maintainers join the team. So JC and Milan, who have been absolutely amazing over the last few months and really active. We're really excited that they've joined the team. So looking forward to see the impact that both of them are going to have on the project. So how do you get a hold of the new beta? Well, you can use the next flag when installing from npm, or if you want to use Docker, again, just use the next flag and you'll get the new version of CLI. As always, please follow us on Twitter at CLI Microsoft 365, and if you're chatting about us, discussing anything on Twitter, please use the hashtag at CLI Microsoft 365. And yeah, If you want to get involved, you want to see what we're working on, come to the GitHub repository, have a look at the issues and discussions. We've got 3 discussions that have just been opened, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So if you're interested on commands that are going to help you manage comments on pages and list items, file versions, and also document sets, then head over to discussions and get involved. We'd love to hear that feedback. And that's it. Back to you, Vesa.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary, on that one. A lot of stuff happening there as well. This is really, really awesome. Now, then we move into the SPFx reusable controls, and we have Alex on the call to cover the latest releases, which happened yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, new releases, as Vesa said, happened yesterday. So we have 3.10.0 for React Controls and 3.9.0 for property controls. The main update there are like 1.15.2 support of SPFx. It took a while to remove all the warnings due to ESLint support instead of TSLint support, but it's for better future, for better code quality and better performance. So now finally the support is there, so check it out. As always, special thanks to our contributors that makes those controls better, fix bugs, include some improvements and new controls. So kudos and shout outs to them, of course. And for more information, go to our GitHub IO pages and follow us on Twitter at M365PnP Controls. That's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to take 30 seconds in here and say Alex is a great example of a community person who used to contribute in GitHub, and now he is actually leading our SharePoint Framework technical development. But then, of course, on his free time, he is still continuing contributing in the open source and community side. So thank you, Alex, on that one. Really, really great work.
Thank you.
See, crowd goes wild. Wow. So, but thank you for that. Reusable controls, by the way, they give you reusable abstractions and easily to use controls. All of them are using Fluent behind the scenes, of course, but they are tying into the APIs, so you can just drag and drop a control in the web part, and then it will start magically working. So really, really cool stuff. On the PnP Modern Search side, the latest version is 4.7, which was happening in June 2022. Super widely used, I can say from my statistics, because I'm from the inside of the Microsoft, I can say that the PnP Modern Search is the most widely used web part worldwide. So it's really, really cool to see thousands and thousands and thousands of tenants actually using this open source solution. It is a great web part providing awesome capabilities, and it's also a really, really cool example of an open source community success. So absolutely brilliant stuff. Paolo Pialorsi, by the way, has a nice video series on his YouTube channel right now ongoing, where he goes through all of the individual features about this web part. Now on the PnP SPFx samples, I will let David to cover what's happening here.
Excellent, thank you, Vesa. It's a light week for samples and SPFx. We know the summer is ending and everybody's getting their needed time off, but we did have an update in the ACEs. Marcin has a shared graph client sample. Now this shows how we can reuse the graph client between ACEs from different solutions, which is super, super handy if you're implementing batching. And because the requests from all ACEs can be batched together, this helps improve performance and overall end user experience. So very, very cool sample, check it out. And again, we are open and love new samples for all of the SPFx web parts, extensions, and ACEs. So check them out. The links that are available there specifically for ACEs, aka.ms/SPFX ACEs, and see all the samples at aka.ms/M365/samples to get an all-up view of all of our samples. So Vesa, back to you.
A lot of samples. Samples are good. Yes. Now let's then move into the together mode. So getting your picture in the together mode, we will grab a GIF animation out of this and release then that within the social media and one of the blog post as well. And then we'll go to the actual demos. Am I in the screen as well? Where am I? Where am I? I'm on the second row. Derek. Yes, we still have a few more seats in the room. Before I start recording, we have 50 seats. If you put your video on, you will get to the GIF animation as well. Thank you, thank you. One more row. Oh, there's Chris on the front row. He just cannot behave. It's always the problem with him. And I will put the recording on, and let's do some hand waving. We'll grab the GIF animation out of this. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And really awesome to have you in the call again. And great to see familiar faces on the call. Excellent. Thank you. And that's it for this week's intros. We went bit longer today than typically because, I'm the silent Finn who, like Finns typically don't talk too much. But the real stars of today are Tony and Waldek, and we'll start with Tony on the Microsoft Graph usage on education endpoints. Tony, take it away.
Thanks, Vesa. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yep, all good, all good.
Great. So, yeah, really excited to show you the My Assignments web part today. So in specifically looking at some of the education graph API endpoints. And if you've not used an education tenant before, this might be quite new to you. So hopefully something interesting for everybody. So a bit about myself. I'm founder of Cloud Design Box. I've worked with the SharePoint framework for a long time, since preview, but I'm not a developer by trade. I started off with using JavaScript and script editor web parts. One thing led to another, and I was making web parts. So I've got some contact details there. So blog, email, and the GitHub repository that we'll be looking at today. So it's there for you to have a look at, download, edit, make changes to, make your own version of. That's all available. And some of the endpoints we'll be looking at in today's demo. So some of these you might be familiar with from just your standard graph endpoints. Some of these are education specific. So starting with the education me endpoint, this is very similar to the me endpoint in graph, except it's got some extended AAD properties that are specific to education. So you'll get extra stuff like the student's grade, or if they're a teacher or a student, what their status is. That will all come back with that education me endpoint. There's also the me join teams, which is just listing your teams as you would get it with your standard graph calls. And then two more education specific ones. So the education me classes is the same as the groups endpoint, but it's filtered to the type of group, which is a template of a class. So inside education, we have the concept of a class team, and you get thousands of these made every academic year in a typical high school. And in a tenant, you might have hundreds of thousands of these. So this endpoint filters it down so you can just retrieve the class groups that you're a member of. And the me assignments endpoint, this is specific to education. So there is no alternative in sort of the standard graph endpoints. So in the education version of Teams, there is a assignments part teams where you can set assignments to students. It's got some really amazing features in there. So you can do things like use AI to measure students' reading progress, and you can set assignments and collect it back. So again, if you've not seen it before, check it out. It's only available to education tenants, unfortunately. So you can't sign up to a developer tenant easily. You need to get in touch with the right people at Microsoft. And all the data inside these teams and inside these endpoints is populated by something called Microsoft School Data Sync. And any school can use that for free. Teams and Office 365 is free for schools. And they can upload their data using CSVs, or they can use OneRoster API. So there's lots of different ways of getting your data into graph, into those AAD objects. And there's a reference to those at the bottom. And this is a quick screenshot of what the assignments look like inside Teams, just so you can visualize what it is that we're trying to aggregate together inside SharePoint. So the Teams assignments is fantastic. Lots of really cool features in there, like a massive amount of features in there. It'll take you all day to look at all of them. In fact, sometimes there's too many. But one thing you can't do is you can't show an aggregated list of those in your SharePoint intranet. So this is one of the things that we wanted to do with this web part. And there was quite a few challenges that we came across. So there was no me assignment endpoint until recently, not officially supported. So you had to go a really long way around getting those assignments. You had to get a list of all the classes, query each class for a list of assignments, put them all together. So it was incredibly intensive when you're calling those API calls for the first time. And throttling is quite bad in education because everybody logs in at the same time at the start of the school day or the lesson, potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of people logging in, loading the same page when they open up their web browser. So it's really important to keep the API usage to a minimum, to use caching, so we're not calling it too many times. So without that me endpoint, we couldn't do it very well. We had to use some server-side caching to do that previously. So that's really good that that is now supported and we can use it in this example. There is an academic rollover process in education as well. Again, something that happens around this time of year. That's why we're all stressed at the moment. And we have to archive all the old class teams. So again, hundreds of thousands of them, do a cleanup process, and then upload the new data for the new academic year. So there's a big process there in September of creating hundreds of thousands of teams inside education tenants, potentially with loads of assignments as well, because if you imagine if you're in 20 different classes in your high school, you're over the year you're going to have lots of assignment sets, so they add up really quickly. So I'll start off just by jumping into a demonstration, and then we'll have a look at the code. So I'm on a SharePoint page here, and if I go to add a web part, so this is running from my local host, and I type in assignment, you'll see Microsoft last week released an assignment web part, but it doesn't show you aggregated assignments. It only shows you the assignment if you put it on a class team page, which is a new homepage that they're designing in Teams, another new feature to education. So if I add this to the page, it doesn't do anything. So this web part's still useful. So if we go and add the My Assignments web part that we've created, this is what it looks like. It shows me all the assignments that have been set inside Teams, and I can just check that. So I can go into Teams, go to my aggregated assignments view inside Teams. You can see I've got some here that I've set. This one is in the past, so we've filtered that in the web parts. And I can see the assignments that I do. I can, if I just publish the page, we've got some paging on here because the list can get very big if teachers don't remember to close off assignments at the end of the day. And if I click on an assignment, it will take me straight to that Teams assignment. So if I just use the web app, it'll take me straight into that Teams assignment. So I can go to it really quickly and easily, straight from SharePoint, straight from my school intranet homepage. And I've got a refresh button here because we cache it for a couple of hours just to avoid lots of throttling. So you can press the refresh button, it will go and fetch the data again. So back into the code. So I'll start off with the API permissions that we're using in here. So some of the endpoints share some of the API permissions. So we only require 3. This is a minimal amount of permissions you need to make this web part work. So we've got the assignments read, which lets us read any assignments and for us as a user. We've got the user read all, which fetches us back the user type and the user attributes, which will tell us if this person is a member of staff or if they're a student, because we need to show a slightly different view of assignments if they're a member of staff than if they're a student, because assignments might be overdue if you're a student, but for the teacher, it's not overdue. It's either set or it's closed. And there's also the edu roster. So this gets us a list of classes and the list of teams, and this actually gives us that join teams permission as well. So we don't need to add that as an extra API permission. So those are the permissions I've used. In this example, I've used React. So I started using React a couple of years ago, found it really useful in reducing development time once I got my head around it. So starting off just in the main file, we've got the web part properties. So there are some settings that we allow end users to do. So we've got a slider to assign the paging value, how many assignments we want to show in one view. We've got the ability to hide overdue assignments because they can get quite big if teachers don't close them off. And we can also show archive teams, so from previous academic years. And the settings for that, if I just edit the web part, you'll see these are the settings that we have here. I've only got a few assignments here, so if I change it, I can change it to 5, so you can't see the paging in action, but that will create another page, and I'll be able to flick through the pages of assignments when they get quite big. So going into our main React component, so we've got a main React component where I do pretty much everything, and then we've got the child component for the assignment item, which refreshes whenever the state changes in the parent item. So what we've got is some states that we use in this particular web part. So a lot of this data is coming back from Graph Async, so it's going to come back to us at different times. So we refresh the web part as that data comes in, as we know more about it. So we've got assignments in there, teams, courses, and one really useful tip if you are using the Graph API is to download the graph types, because that will let you define some of those interfaces much easier. So I can bring in, let me show you a quick example, the education class. And it already maps all those properties that's going to come back from that API endpoint. So I'm not having to manually do that and create, complex interfaces. So that's definitely a really useful thing that we used when calling Graph. And just to go through the different Graph calls that we use in here. So the first Graph call we do is to get the education me endpoint. And the only reason we do that is to find out if they're a member of staff or if they're a student. So we only select the primary role. And when that comes back to us, it will tell us if they're a user, if they're a student, or if they're a teacher. We set that in the state. Again, that refreshes the content, and it will style the content for a student. So the reason we do that is some assignments might be overdue for a student, so we mark them as red and overdue. And for teachers, we show it slightly differently. So an assignment is either set in the future or it's set in the past. And what you'll see is I've created a caching service that I use this with most of the web parts that I create, which is a way I can just cache any of the Graph API calls in local storage. I set some keys for them, so I've got little helper functions to do that. And then inside here, what you see is when the data comes back, we set that in the caching key as well, just before we refresh the state. So if we ever refresh the page, it doesn't have to load that again. It's already got it. So minimal API calls where possible. One really disappointing thing we have to do is call the join teams endpoint. And the only reason we have to do that is to find out if the team is archived, because the education endpoint for classes doesn't show that AAD property. If it did, we wouldn't need to do this call at all. So unfortunately, it adds on an extra call when we're creating the web parts, which obviously isn't great, but it's only one call. So it's not the end of the world. We'll just call it and find out if the class is archived or not. We go and get the classes. So we get the course name and the display name of that particular class. And then we go and get the assignments for me. So we could just return the assignments for me, but you wouldn't know which class those assignments belong to, which course they belong to, which isn't great for the student experience. So that's why we call the assignments API. There is a lot of limitations to using this at the moment, so we can't do a lot of filtering on this. We can't filter by date. Again, quite disappointing. So we're having to manually do that in some of the functions inside the code, which is a real shame, really. But again, it just adds a bit more complexity to that web part. So we're sort of sorting stuff by time. We also add in the paging as well. So again, I've just set the paging as part of the state. And then what we do when we actually go to render the web part. So if I just go down into the render code here, you'll see that we render the HTML that we've aggregated up from that child component, but we also render the pages, so the paging and where we are in that page. So whenever that state gets updated, somebody clicks on the button and it calls back that function and refreshes the state with a new page number. That will then filter down into this render function, and it will refresh the child components. Now, if I show you what the assignment item looks like, so this is the assignment item. It's quite a simple React components. We've got a URL to open up that direct link to the assignment. It's a very long URL where we have to add in the class ID, which we got from another reason why we have to get the class ID is we need it to link to the assignment. And we go and get the assignment ID as well. So once we've got that, we can generate that link to go straight into that assignment item inside Teams. So that's what we do in terms of the child item. And in terms of, just have a quick look at the other things I was going to show you. So in terms of the caching, one thing that we do is we refresh the cache if maybe it's a bit out of date and the student needs to press the refresh button. So we have a function where we do that. So if I just have a quick look at where the cache is refreshed here. So we do a check for the cache before we call the APIs. And that means we don't even need to bother calling the APIs if it exists in the cache, because this function runs, it checks the cache on the local machine, and then it will refresh the state with that cache data. So once it's got that, we know then that we don't need to call the APIs. So what you see in the render function here, we check the cache first. Once we've checked the cache, if it's empty, then we'll then call the assignments API. We'll call the Teams API and the course API and the end user API to get that data into that web part. So another thing I was also going to show you as well is what happens when we refresh the data. So if somebody presses the refresh button, we run this function, and this clears all the cache. So it removes the cache from the user's machine. And then we just set the state as blank. And then when the web part refreshes, it knows it needs to call the API again and get that data back. What you also might be aware of is we create quite a complex caching string. So again, where this might differ to using cache in other places is in schools, you might have a shared device where a student logs in and then another student logs in to the same device. And if we don't include the login name, then the cache will include assignment data from the previous user. And if we don't include the location, we might have a multi-tenant setup where we've got multiple schools on a single tenant. So we have to remember where that web part is on the page so that we mark that when we're caching the data in the CDB assignments area. And then it's pretty straightforward in terms of styling for the web part. Quite minimal CSS in there. And yeah, that's pretty much a very quick overview of the assignment web parts. And this is free to download from GitHub. So yeah, feel free to check it out. Have a look at the code. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about it as well. And hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into what's happening in the education tenants, which, like I say, is slightly different to what you might get in your standard developer tenants. You get features like the assignments, you get class teams, so you get a whole host of features that you might not be aware exist inside teams until you start working with an education-specific tenant. So back to you, Vesa.
Excellent, thank you, Tony. Really cool stuff, and it's I would say it's not just about the education tenant and the education APIs. It was also about how you implemented the refreshing and implemented the web part. That's always an interesting scenario to go through and learn from that, because there's always new people in this call who haven't necessarily even written their first web part yet. So it's thank you for explaining things.
I would recommend using the Microsoft documentation. That's where I learned all this from, was the graph examples on the Microsoft site. Really simple, really easy to do, and you can just apply it to anything, whether it's the education endpoints, whether it's Teams endpoint. It just works really well.
Excellent, thanks, Tony. Really, really cool stuff. Now, next we'll then move to Waldek's screen, and we can see Waldek, your screen already.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Perfect.
Take it away.
All right. So for the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'd like to show you the new feature that has been introduced in SharePoint Framework version 1.15, which gives you the ability to customize list forms, right? So when you think about a list, right, you have three forms in there. You have a form to create new item in a list, to view an item that is already in a list, and to edit an item, right? And with the SharePoint Framework 1.15, we got the ability to override these forms. So you can create your own experiences on top of that, maybe even to the point where you want to build a simple app experience that is by the data from a list. So let's walk through it, how that works step by step. Now, the first prerequisite is you have to have installed Node. And for SharePoint Framework 1.15, you need to have at least installed Node version 14.17.x. Right, so that is something what you see here on my screen. Then the next ingredient, the key ingredient, is Microsoft Generator SharePoint version at least 1.15.0. I have installed now here on the screen 1.15.2, which is the latest version available as of now. And then for the rest of the toolchain, Gulp CLI, not Gulp, Gulp CLI, which will then use Gulp install that is inside the project, and Yo, so that we can run, so that we can create the project. So let's do that. Let's create a new SharePoint Framework project with a form extension. but with one thing. To avoid that we wait too long and you will all watch me install npm packages, let's skip that part, because for the first part, it is not important, right? So let's create a project that will allow us to create that customizer of a form of a list. 3, 2, 1. Yo needs to wake up. I think it's the first time that I create a project today, so maybe it still needs to wake up and get the right dependencies from the disk. Also, you're looking at it, so it's also slow because of that. And it's also hot, so maybe like all these three, add to that it takes a while. So every single time as you create a new project with SPFx, you need to enter the name. And here you need to pick up a type of component that you want to add. You don't see a form customizer here because it is an extension. So it's one of the types of extensions that you can build with SPFx. So here we go into extension. And from here, from the different types of extensions that we have available, we go all the way down and pick a form customizer. So that form allows us, or that type of extension allows us to customize the form experience of a list. We use the default name. We'll not do anything with that. And to keep things simple and accessible to everybody, let's not use React yet, right? 3, 2, 1, project is done. So let's see what we have in place. When we go to source and extension, so this is the project that we got from the generator SharePoint, right? And in here, we can see the Hello World form customizer that we have just created. What is in there? Let me move that aside. It is just an extension. So like any other extension in SPFx, it has properties which you can pass to basically make it configurable across instances so that you can reuse it across different size use cases and so forth and so on. Next, you have the same onInit method that you have in web parts and extension. You have the render because there's a UI part to it. You want to build a form customizer that has a UI to it. So you need to have a render so that you can render on the page the HTML that you want to show. This part is exactly the same. And then we arrive at 2 form customizer specific methods that we have and which you must use. So when you save an item, imagine that you build a new form or an added form and you change the item. You need to call this form save method because that then notifies SPFx and the runtime of a page that that form was saved. The item was saved, the form was saved, and it will then handle that behavior properly on the page. The same thing goes for close, because if you view an item or edit an item or create an item and you cancel, there's also a behavior attached to it. This is exactly why you need to ensure that whatever code you add on this page in this component, you also need to call these 2 methods that are tied into SPFx runtime, right? So this is a key part. All right, so this is just very bare bones thing. Like there is really not much specific to it. And one more thing that we get, if you go to config and serve, we get a different configs to run or to serve this component in debug mode, right? Because like it's a form of a list. And as I said, there are 3 behaviors that you can implement, right? So you can implement a new form, view form, or an edit form. And to make it really easy for you to debug them, we get from SPFx the configs for new form, added form, and view form with exactly the right components ID and page type parameters, IDs, and so forth and so on, so that the only thing left for you is to run gulp serve with one of these, and then you will be able to preview that instantly in your site on your list without having to manually build that by yourself, right? Another thing important for you to keep in mind is that, well, a list has 3 behaviors. It has the new, edit, and view. And you can choose to override either all 3 of them or 1 or 2. So that is up to you, 1. Another thing is you can choose whether you want to implement all 3 views, the new, edit, and view, within one component in SPFx, or maybe you want to build 3 separate because they are so different, or you want to separate things and so forth and so on. So you have that ability to choose between whether you want to put everything into one or you want to have 3 components that are separate and each one serves only one view. And the way it works, like we will go eventually into the detail, like how do you associate that on runtime, right? But that's an important thing for you to keep in mind. All right, so these are the basics. This is what you get when you create new form customizer with SPFx 115. The next step is let's see one in action. What do these things actually do? So here I have built a really simple form, right? And here you see the most basics view form. It shows a field and the value of a field for an item. So this is my view form. Now let's go to another form, right? So we will change the page type to 6. And here, if we go back to config serve, we can see that page type 6 corresponds to an edit form. So we will be able to edit an item. All right, I've changed it to 6, 3, 2, 1, and now we have a title field with an input box. So in here, we can add the value and cancel or save the item, and that will actually change the item in the list attached to it, right? And then finally, we also have the 8, which is the new form, right? So in here, we don't edit an item, which is why the input box is empty, because we're creating new item. And again, save, cancel to either create the item or abort it, right? So how is this implemented? You've seen already, right, that we get the basics extension with the basics in there, right? Let me close that for you and move this aside just to give you a little bit overview of here, right? So in this case, I chose to implement all the different states, so the new, view, and edit into one form customize, right? And that is exactly why I need to handle all of them, right? So what do we do first? Well, on init, we need to check which display mode are we in. And that is exposed to us by the basic form customizer, right? So in this case, if the form display mode is new, well, we don't need to do anything because there's nothing for us to load in this case, at least, right? There is nothing for us to load because we're creating a new item. But you can imagine that if you imagine that you want to create new order from, and that is related to a customer in CRM or something, right? In that case, you would here still need to load the data that you want to associate it with. There's just no item data to load for you because you're creating a new item in the list, right? So for a new form, in this case, we don't do anything, we return early. Now, if we have anything else, so either view or edit, we need to load the item that we want to work with, right? So in this case, we use the SP HTTP client so that we have authenticated call, and then we use REST, in this case, to get our list, get by title, the context list, right? So basically the list on which we currently work, and then also item. So these properties are exposed to us directly in the context, right? So there is nothing for us, like we don't need to parse URLs or do anything else. We can just grab the data directly from there and get the item, right? And then also an additional thing, if you want to edit an item, you also need to get the E tag. So E tag allows you to ensure integrity of the item, that basically, in other words, that nobody else has changed that and you will not override their changes, right? So that is exactly the thing you have to have. And then you need to store that something in the class, right? So we have the E tag that we store, and then we store the item, right? Which we get from the response, and E tag we get from the headers. And then the last thing left is the rendering, right? So as you've seen, depending on the different views, like in the display mode, we don't show input box because there is nothing to edit. So we only want to show things. So in this case, we have a basic div with a label and basically the value of the field. And the only option that we have for interaction is to close the form, to which we then also associate event, right? So that on click, that thing will do something. And that is on our close. If we look at that, right, you will see that that will then close internally the form close, the behavior that is again tied to the runtime in SPFx. In another case, right, so if we have new added form, in this case, we make it very simple in a way that, well, we always show the input box, and the only difference is whether we fill the title or we put in there an empty string, right? So that is the only difference for the rendering. Again, that will depend very much on your case, and it can get very elaborate depending on what you want to build, right? And the same case, we also associate behavior to our save and close events, that for which we will have 2 buttons on the page. And then beyond that, we call REST to either create new item or update the item that we currently have. And that will then end up to this behavior that you've seen with the new, added, and view forms. Important part, right? So imagine you've built that. How do you deploy that to production? Well, the way it works is that you associate form customizer with a content type, right? And in every list, you have at least two. You have the item one and folder, right? So you would basically using, and you can do that through CSOM, REST, PowerShell. You will be able to do that with CLI too, right? You need to get a reference to content type. And on content type, you have a pair of properties for each type of forms, right? So you have display form client side component ID, which is a very long name, but it's extremely clear what it wants. It wants the ID of the component that you use to render display form of the content type, right? And that basically will match from the manifest to this GUID here. So it needs to be this. And then another one you have that belongs to this pair are properties that you want to pass. As I said, you can build it in a way that you set things up, and you can set it up with column names, with locale, with anything you can imagine that's relevant to your code, right? So that is one pair. Well, you have then the same pair with content type for edit form, client side component ID. Thank you, Copilot. And then you will have component properties. There you go. I don't need to type anything. Then you will have also new form, right? Component ID and new form client side component properties. There you go, right? So with these 6 properties that belong to content type object, right, or the old SP content type, you can deploy the code. You can associate it to a content type. And you can either choose to associate it to a content type that is already on the list. You can associate it on a content type that is on the site, and that will be applied to every single instance of the content type in every single list in the site. Or you could even put it in the content type hub, in which case you will apply to all instances of this content type across all sites in your tenant, right? So these are kind of the options you have. And then last thing left is like, what are the different things you could imagine to build with this, right? Like, this is a very simple case, basically, to go through the mechanics. But you could, for example, build something like here, right? So in here, I have a list that is meant to let users approve or review the request for a trip, right? And in here, you can imagine that, well, you might want to be able to see from where to where you traveled and so forth and so on. And you only want to have 2 options, accept or not, right? So this is a very simple type of app that you could build on top of a list that gives you a specific behavior and UX relevant to this case, but doesn't require really a fully fledged app on Azure with storage and so forth and so on, right? So these are kind of the options you have. Here, I will pass it back to Vesa. And if there's anything anybody wants to ask, we can go through that, or we can close up.
So a few things, just to recap on things, because just making sure that you can understand, we're explaining this in the right way. You were doing really awesome job there. The properties is currently the way of deploying these in the production. So as said, you will need to run some code, or the code could be running as part of a web part, or it could be running as an external thing, which is associating those properties. They are actually also in a feature framework. So technically, you could have a list provisioning as part of the solution getting installed on a site level, which have all of these properties in place and associated to the right component type. Nowadays, though, we see more and more solutions and SharePoint Framework solutions to be deployed in tenant scope rather than in a site scope, and that means that that's not an option necessarily. Now, we do have a lot of engineering people actually in this call. So if people have good ideas on how we can improve this and suggestions, those are more than welcome, because that's super, super valuable for us to understand how can we make this easier for you on these things. Comment on Jim, which is less and less of the feature framework. That is absolutely the intention. Now, we do have the option of using the classic feature framework as part of the provisioning of assets in the SharePoint Framework solutions, because it does exist in the SharePoint. Now, is it something what you should be using? Not necessarily. You can choose to use that, but it's not necessarily always the best option. Now, we're also looking into, for example, can you go back on the wallet? Can you go to a list, an example list, just any list in here? So right now, as you saw from Waldex's demo, as you are creating a new item, or if this association does exist, we are always redirected away from the context of the list. And the interesting discussion point, Alex just put the link on the chat as well. This is almost like scripted. Thank you, Alex. Is that is this good enough? Would you like to have?
I can't hear Vesa. Anybody else?
No,
Yeah,
Vesa dropped. Vesa dropped.
Yeah, he mentioned he was having internet trouble earlier. So yeah.
So I believe what he was saying. First of all, and that's the same question I see in the chat. So yes, right now we are redirecting you to the separate page. If you can see, it's layout 15 SPList form .spx page, and yes, we are considering on providing the same functionality in the panel. So how you have the out-of-the-box forms, so when you click on the item or new, you just see the panel opened, and you can modify or create your item right from there. So we are looking into this scenario. It's top priority. We understand that it's needed, and we are working to enable it for third-party devs too. I believe that's what he wanted to say.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me share the slides here. We will wrap up. Well, thank you to our amazing presenters for today, Tony and Waldick. Fantastic stuff. Really great to see all this new cutting edge technology and how it's being used and how we can use it. The recording will be available in 24 hours on the Microsoft 365 community YouTube channel. You can access that at aka.ms/m365/videos. If you subscribe today, you'll get alerted as soon as it's available. You won't be able to download it in the Teams channel or in the chat, so don't worry if it tells you that it's unavailable. You can absolutely get it at aka.ms/m365/videos. Follow us on Twitter to be updated as well, at Microsoft 365 Dev and at M365 PnP. The next Viva Connections and SharePoint Framework call is September 8th, 2 weeks from today. The next M365 General and Power Platform is 1 week from today, September 1st. Wow, it's already here. You can access all of these at aka.ms/m365/calls. Get the invites, get to the YouTube playlists, or directly join the Teams call. Thank you, everybody, for a fantastic call today. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week and weekend.